We turn now to Kenya, and we are very honored to be joined here on our show by Booker Omole, who is the National Vice Chairperson and National Organizing Secretary of the Communist Party of Kenya. Booker, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and it's a pleasure to meet you again and in Rania today, especially at this historic moment when we are, looking at the so-called legacy of the Queen.
Yeah. I tell you, the pleasure is all ours, and yeah, the legacy. It's interesting to me because so much of the conversation is like, at least in the United States, well, maybe the Queen or maybe the British did something wrong, but it wasn't when the Queen was around. But some of the biggest crimes of the British Empire in the history of the British Empire, but certainly in the African continent, took place in Kenya when she was the Queen. And I was hoping you could just talk about that, because I think that's a history, of the Land and Freedom Army and others that is just unknown to most Americans, especially the brutality of the British.
Yes. So, first of all, probably the Kenyan people and the Kenyan masses view the death of the Queen, as a painful reminder of the atrocities that Kenya continue to suffer to date. Because sometimes we focus on the colonial, but then we also have the neo-colonial system, and the same policy and the same system still reigns in Kenya today. So in terms of the colonial era, then it was brutal repression, massive exploitation of the natural resources, and super exploitation of almost free labor that the Kenya as a country offered. But in our perspective from the Communist Party of Kenya, we should not only look at it from the death of the Queen, because the death of the Queen is not enough. The monarch system got to fall, and it will not fall by its own. It has to be pushed. It has to be fought to fall. So we cannot be sitting here waiting for the death of the Queen or the death of Henry Kissinger and all these, filthy capitalists that has continued to ravage the continent of Africa. So in 1957, which is the most, historic event, that under the signature of the Queen, our freedom fighter, Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, was even killed, murdered, and his body to date has never been recovered. Even the Queen himself and the entire British government has never admitted any of those atrocities that they committed in Kenya. And in fact, they have continued to act as if everything is normal. There is a big campaign now in our country that we want to give Dedan Kimathi, a decent burial. We want to put him, in the beacon of history as a beacon of hope of our people, of our young people. And several things still, meander in our mind when we see these misreactions, especially from the head of state and the Kenyan government, in terms of issuing statements on the so-called the legacy of the Queen. And it has exposed several things for us here in our country. For example, in terms of issues of land, which still stands in our country today. Land is at the center of the struggle, and was at the center of the struggle, the freedom. And I hear some people try to praise the king and the Queen of having managed a peaceful transition from the colonial, and I thought that's silly, childish talk, because in fact, after the British actually lost the war for independence, they opted to negotiate to end up with a sham independence to actually favor the white settler, big landowners in our country. So, in fact, to say that she even tried to have a peaceful transition, it's like dancing on the graves of the poor people that had been murdered during that period. So when we had and this just shows how the Kenyan population is ahead of their government and ahead of their political leaders in terms of political consciousness, because there can only be two things that happens when people are eulogizing the Queen. First of all, is that the Kenyan government or the Kenyan politicians who are still, an appendage of the British system that benefits from alms, of course, then will not want to sever that relationship. So they indeed said and talked positive things about the Queen, or say that out of respect they had to say certain things, especially when they're cornered. But for us who are determined for a total liberation of our country, we have no privilege to celebrate the life of a colonizer for something that she has not even admitted that sometimes here when we are in debates, people ask that if my grandfathers oppressed you, what should I do? Or probably the easiest answer will be kill yourself if you cannot recognize that you're still benefiting from the same, atrocities that was committed by your grandparents. And if that could be the case, then in our own perspective, we see several things that brings out how even our education system has been interfered with to rewrite our history and then bring out the British, colonial British as the victors. Because you see, even in the oppressed stratas of the Kenyan society, we could see some elements of Christian fundamentalists or members of the Anglican Church celebrating the death of the Queen and wishing her to stay well in heaven, with the angels. But in actual sense, what basically that one reveals is how deeply the Kenyan education system has been attacked by the former colonial to try and rewrite histories, and of course vilify call the victims the perpetrators, and on the other side even call the perpetrators the victims of such atrocities. And we could see even the name they gave to our freedom fighter Dedan Kimathi. They called him a terrorist, and for a long time he was in the British terrorist list until we redeemed his image, and now he's an epitome of hope for our people.
Booker, it's so interesting to me how in so many parts of the developing world, whether we're talking about the Middle East or Africa, or we're talking about India earlier, the debate or the controversy or these attitudes exist among the people, the class of people in the country who collaborated with the British or still benefit as the capitalist class. I'm just curious, in Kenya, it sounds like there's been that back and forth where there's a segment of people in Kenya who are who have a sort of nostalgia for the Queen and the British, and then there's everybody else. Do these dynamics exist across other parts of Africa as well? I mean, the crimes of the British obviously were very extreme in Kenya, but certainly not isolated there in terms of the continent of Africa.
Yeah, you see, the Queen, for a fact, represents a small minority, of people that continues to be, parasites on the back of the working class. And for the Queen to actually, or the monarch system in British, to perfect their exploitation of the African people, they have to find their own stooges. They have to find their own puppets. They have to find, for lack of a better word, their dogs to manipulate in Africa. So indeed, the oppressor would not have been so powerful if he did not have collaborators among the oppressed class. So, for example, in Kenya, we have the comprado bourgeoisie, we have the national bourgeoisie that sees themselves as brokers of the big metropolis. And they, for a fact, they see the establishment of the monarch system as an end to how they continue to exploit the Kenyan people. For example, here in our country, we still have the Batuk, the British military that is stationed here to protect any dictator that rises to power. That in the event that there is violence, riots, or an opposition to the state, then the British army will step in to support the local army. And this has also been as gave up to a string of military bases in Kenya. So the group of the sellouts, the parasitic class here, try to find narratives to justify reasons why they need to celebrate the Queen. But the people who have suffered the oppressive system or the repressive system of colonialism and neo-colonialism can never forget those moments, because it is real to them. It's not just about stories that continue to be told. For a fact, we've had, for example, people in the tourist sector, coming up with stories like, the monarch system and the Queen is a big attraction of our country. And every time a prince comes to Nairobi, then we are on the map. Such justification just show how bankruptcy of ideas this parasitic class holds. Because for them, if any relationship benefits them, then they do not care about every other person. So there are indeed the classes of the former home guards that actually collaborated with the British system, with the British colonizers to brutalize their own people. Those people must continue to advance a narrative that a better world, is better with the Queen, who then, the Queen Mama of the British never goes wrong. Her words are measured to protect the stolen wealth from the South. And we can continue to highlight certain things that, for example, if you look at even the democracy, in actual sense, the monarch system brings out the hypocrisy of the British democracy. Because how do you have an elected leader reigning for all that time, and then it's passed on from one son to the other, as if there is, some scientific evidence that wisdom could be passed from father to son, and in that way. Even in our revolutionary movements, we don't care whether you are the son of who, but you have to build your credentials as the love of people. But you cannot say, just because I was son, for example, of Dedan Kimathi, therefore I am a freedom fighter. But we have to then look at the monarch system in Britain as just a small gain class that is trying to maintain and influence strategies among the ruling class of the Southern Hemisphere or of the poor countries. So, for a fact, I agree with you totally that that the collaborating class in Kenya would like to take the Kenyan masses out of reality. And it is our duties as revolutionaries to continue to remind them that fact will never forget the atrocities that are committed by the colonial power, Imperial Britain in our country. And if they do want us to do that, then they should come openly and delink themselves from that dirty past, and and hand over the wealth. In fact, bring the wealth and all the artifacts that were stolen from our country, and give a public apology, so that we start a honest relationship based on solidarity, mutual interest, and love for our people. In that way, then we could say that we are ready to start and open a new page. But if you still continue to interfere with our internal affairs, you continue even to determine our policies through the loaning system. force upon austerity measures, then how is it possible that such a people can forget, how you murdered or raped their parents and, robbed their dignity? It's impossible, for the African people to even think of, forgiving the king, the queen. For it's an education more the Kenyan masses that the death of the queen is not enough. Even if the queen dies, but the monarch remains in place. Instead of Kenya dies today, but colonial system remains. Even Obama went, but Trump came in. Now we have Joe Biden there. The system, the capitalist system continues to entrench itself, and a few minority continue to, to get resources for only themselves and subjugating the rest of the population into poverty.
Well, I very well said, and I think a good summary of where we are and what the legacy does, and what the legacy means or should mean for people's movements around the world. Booker Omole from the Communist Party of Kenya, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you more often. And good work you're doing to bring the left perspective, away from this corporate, manufactured propaganda to turn our brains upside down.
Right on, right on. We will definitely talk again soon. Much appreciation to you, my brother.